Alright everyone, welcome back to another video. We're doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be making a tier list for items on Urgot, and I'm also going to be explaining why that item is good and why I'm rating it the choice that I'm rating it. So yeah, let's get into it. So first up on the list we have Black Cleaver, and I'm going to be putting this in S+ tier. I think this is an insanely good item on Urgot. I personally rush it in 90% of my games. Damage, HP, ability haste, so the stats are great for Urgot. Also, both of the passives are really nice because Urgot stacks them up really fast with his W. So the first passive is going to give you armor shred, basically. It just shreds a portion of their armor up to 30% once you get 6 stacks. And then the second part gives you movement speed per stack. So you can circle around people quicker to proc your passives. So overall, just a great DPS item, and I really love this item on Urgot. So another really nice thing about Black Cleaver that I'm adding in after the fact here is you get it right on your level 9 spike, and the build path is also really nice because you can buy longswords compared to an item like Titanic where you have to buy the pickaxe. So yeah, you usually get this item. It's also a little bit cheaper than Titanic, so you usually get this item like right on your level 9 or a little bit before if you're doing good. So this combined with your level 9, you get that W toggle, is a really huge power spike on Urgot. Moving on to the next item, we have Eclipse, and I'm also going to be putting this S+ tier. It's my personal favorite mythic on Urgot. You get a mix of AD, lethality, omnivamp, and then the mythic passive is also insanely good. It scales really hard into the game, especially if you're versus tanky champions, because you get percent armor pen and then also more base movement speed. So that can help you proc your shotguns quicker. Overall, just a really nice item. I think it just gives you a mix of a lot of things, a lot of stats that are just really good for Urgot. Especially good into tankier team comps, and also really good if you want to side lane versus certain like split push champions like Fior, for example. I think it's really good against. And then you're also not stacking HP into her percent HP true damage, which is nice. You guys do want to make sure that you build serrated Dirk when you're building into Eclipse. Always try to get serrated Dirk before the vamp. When you have Black Cleaver plus serrated Dirk, it's a really strong power spike. You can kill people. If you land E, you can kill people easily, even if they're pretty tanky. So yeah, S+ tier for me. I really like this mythic. It was nerfed a while back, but I think it was really broken before then. So now I think it's still really good. I don't think it's like super broken anymore, but I do still think it's S+ tier. Moving on to the final item in S+ tier, it's going to be Prowler's Claw. And I think Prowler's Claw is also one of the best mythics on Urgot. I think Eclipse and Prowlers are like situational. Like they can each be the best in the game, depending on like the enemy team comp. So Prowlers is really good into squishy team comps where lethality is going to shine. And also it's really good if they have ranged champions that you just want to dash onto. And it can also be really good if they just have like a really fed ADC that you just want to take out. You can just Prowlers onto them and then E them. Sometimes you don't even need an E if you can get your shotguns. You can just Prowlers and get like 2 or 3 shotguns, and that can just take out a fed carry. So yeah, this item's really good as well. These are the 2 best mythics on Urgot, in my opinion. And that's also going to be the final item in the S+ tier. So moving on to the S tier, we have Titanic Hydra coming in first. Still a great item on Urgot. There's a few things that do hold this item back, in my opinion. Number one, it's really expensive compared to these other items. It's 200 gold more than each of these other items. And then also the build path isn't that good. You have to buy a pickaxe. You can't buy any longswords. And also, once you have all the items, it's also kind of pricey to upgrade. Like, once you have everything, it's still 800 gold. I find myself just being like a few hundred gold off when I really need it a lot of the time. But yeah, still really good, especially get into like heavy melee team comps where you can just really make use of that AoE damage. And overall, I still really like it. There's some Urgot players that don't actually build it anymore, but I would still rate it S tier. I think it's a solid item. HP, damage, it scales you into the game. If you're building other HP items, it gets really good late game. So it's a good scaling item as well. Next up on the list, we have Steraks Gauge, and I'm going to be putting this S tier. You probably could make an argument for it being S+ tier, but this item's really good on Urgot. You want to build it more as a late game item, or like mid to late game item. I've been building it 3rd or 4th item in a lot of my builds, and it's been really nice. Riot recently double buffed it up. They buffed the base AD that you get, so you get around 65 base AD once you're level 18. It might be a little bit more than that. I can't remember the exact number right now, but the shield is really nice because it scales off your bonus HP. And if you get that shield up, you're pretty much always guaranteed to get your grinder off. You can't really die if you have Sterax, because the shield is just so massive, it can just absorb so much burst. So yeah, this item's really good. It's especially good into champions that have a lot of burst, and especially champions like Darius and Garen that have like ultimates that just nuke you. I think it's really good to counter those champs. And then you can also, at least for Darius, you can like mess up his resets if he tries to ulti you and then you get a big shield. But yeah, really solid item on Urgot. And if you're building damage HP, I would pretty much always include Sterax in your build, at least as a late game item. The next item in the list is going to be Randuin's Omen, and this is personally one of my favorite tank items on Urgot. Really good into just heavy AD comps, especially if they have a lot of auto attacks. And the thing that's really crazy about this item is you can build the Warden's Mail for 1,000 gold, and you can honestly just sit on Wardens. And sometimes just having a Warden's Mail into heavy auto attack team comps feels like a legendary item. It's really that good. I think we all know that as an Urgot player, we just get countered by Wardens so hard. But yeah, this item's really good, especially good if they have a lot of crit. And also you get a little slow that helps you stick to people. It doesn't really last for that long, but it is a really big slow. So it can give you another way to land your ulti as well. Overall, just a nice tank item on Urgot. I would put it S tier. I end up building this item a lot, actually. The last and final item in the S tier is going to be Maw of Malmortius, and this is really good into just heavy AP burst champions if they have a lot of mages. And it's also really good into Mordekaiser too. The reason for that is because the lifeline passive. So once you drop low in that lifeline magic shield procs, you get 10% Omnivamp until you leave combat. So it's really nice on Urgot because his shotguns do so much damage, so you heal pretty good off the Omnivamp. And yeah, you do want to keep in mind that you can't buy Sterax and Maw. They do share that lifeline passive, so you have to buy one or the other. And a really nice thing to know about Maw is the shield scales off your bonus AD. So if you're going a really damage heavy build with not much HP, if you're going like full damage and like full lethality, it can be really good to get a Maw over a Sterax because Sterax scales with your bonus HP. So yeah, if you're going like a really damage lethality build and they have a lot of AP burst, Maw's a really good item into a team comp like that. And yeah, overall just a solid item. It's going to be the last item that I put in S tier. Alright, moving on to A tier. Our first item is going to be Frostfire Gauntlet. And this item's still good on Urgot. It's just kind of hard to tank up nowadays in a lot of games. And it's kind of unreliable if you want to go like carry mode. So I like to go Frostfire if I get a little bit behind in the game and I'm kind of starved for gold. And especially if my carries are doing well, like if bot lane is doing good, I feel a lot more comfortable just buying Frostfire and just trying to frontline for them. And it's also pretty good into like ranged team comps, I would say. I'm going to get into that once I cover the next item here. You'll see why I'm saying that. But for me, Frostfire is A tier. Solid tank item if you're learning Urgot and you just want to beef up. Next item is going to be Sunfire Aegis, and this is very similar to Frostfire Gauntlet. All the points I said about being frontline and like your carries doing well, all that applies to Sunfire. The thing about Sunfire though, it's really good if you need Tenacity from the Mythic passive, and it's also really good into heavy melee team comps. If the enemy team has like 3 or 4 melee champions, Sunfire is going to do a lot more damage than Frostfire will. So it's really good if you want to do a little bit more damage and you also need that Tenacity. It is a little bit more expensive than Frostfire, but you also do get more resist, and you only get a little bit less HP. I honestly don't really notice a difference in tankiness when I buy these. I actually feel a little bit tankier when I get Sunfire because I already have so many HP items on Urgot. Like having the extra resist feels actually pretty nice. But yeah, this is A tier for me. Really similar to Frostfire. Really good tank option. Next up on the A tier, we have Gargoyle's Stoneplate. And this item's actually a pretty good final item on Urgot, especially if you need both armor and MR because it gives the mix resist. So I knock it down from S tier just because it is kind of pricey, and sometimes you don't get full value out of the shield. Sometimes you do if they have like heavy burst. It's really good, especially into if they have like big ultis, like a fiddlestick ulti or like a MF ulti. It's really good in case you get caught out by that. You can just pop stone plate and just tank it out. Another cool thing about this item is that you can actually use it while you're pulling people into the grinder with Urgot. It's the only active item that you can actually use while you're pulling, like anytime during your pull. So that's kind of nice. Overall, solid tank item. More of like a 6 item for me if I do build it, but solid option. Next item in A tier is going to be Shrildia's Grudge, and this item's really good if you get really fed on Urgot or they have like really tanky champions. The passive works on your passive shotgun, so you can get a lot of slows off with your shotguns. So also really get into like melee team comps where you want to kite them out. I really like this into just like tanky melee team comps. And I also really just like it if I get like super fed. But I will say it is a little bit greedy. That's why I'm not putting it S tier. I think if they have like control mages or champions that it's hard to get to actually proc the shotguns to get the slow, I think it's really greedy into those type of team comps. But yeah, really good damage item and really good if you get fed, in my opinion. Next up, we have Guardian Angel, and I'm also going to be putting this A tier. I think it's a solid option later on in the game, especially if they're like heavy AD and you just want some armor and damage. I think sometimes GA can be really clutch, but sometimes you just die like right after you get revived. It is pretty nice though on Urgot, I would say. It gives you a lot of damage. It's pretty cheap. And also buying a stopwatch can be really clutch. Like if there's going to be a big fight around like Baron or Dragon, you can just buy a stopwatch and that can sometimes win you the fight. So building into this item can be actually really good, and that can be game winning. So usually when I would want like a stopwatch for a big fight, like let's say you have exactly 750 and you think there's going to be a fight soon, that's the time where I'd get a stopwatch, and those are the games where I'd build into GA. Next up in A tier, we have Force of Nature, and this item is really good into AP team comps that do a lot of like damage over time or low burst, because you want to stack it up, and then once you get it stacked up, you get a lot of movement speed and you take like 25% reduced magic damage. So this item's really good once you stack it up. You don't want to buy it into like heavy AP burst, because by the time you get it stacked up, you'll be close to death by then. But yeah, really good item. If they have a lot of just like low damage magic sources, that's where I build this item. And the movement speed feels really nice too. You can also sometimes sell your boots later on in the game, especially if you're going Prowlers or Eclipse, because they'll give you a lot of movement speed off the Mythic passive. So you can sell your boots for Force of Nature, and your movement speed will still be pretty good. Similar to Force of Nature, we have Spirit Visage, and this is a good option if you have an Enchanter on your team, or maybe like multiple Enchanters. It's also going to boost the shielding from like a Sterax or your Clip Shield, and the Omnivamp healing as well. It can also be really nice if you know you're going to get Ocean Soul, because that can be a lot of healing too. So yeah, this is a good option if you basically want to have at least an Enchanter on your team, something like Janna or Soraka, that's going to be healing or shielding you a lot. Next item in A tier is going to be Anathema's Chains, and this item's very situational on Urgot, but the situations where it's viable, I think it's actually pretty good. Gives you HP, ability haste. It's also very cheap. I believe it's 2,600. So it's really good if they just have like one damage threat that you just want to take out. And once it fully stacks, they're going to do 30% reduced damage to you. You do want to make sure you're not building it into true damage though. Like don't build it into Vayne, for example, because the damage reduction doesn't work against true damage. It's really good into stuff like Kog'Maw though. I build it into Tryndamere sometimes if I'm struggling with the 1v1. And pretty good item, very cheap, very easy to get. Alright, the last and final item in A tier is going to be Kenpunk Chainsword, and I actually don't see it on the list here, so I'll just edit in a picture. But yeah, it's going to be A tier for me. I personally don't really like to build anti-heal that much. I'll build it if it's like really good for the game, but usually if I need anti-heal for my matchup, I just end up taking Ignite, and that's been pretty good for me. But yeah, I think Chainsword is pretty good overall. You can, especially if you have Titanic, you can apply it pretty easily to everybody in the team fight. And then also your shotguns are going to do AoE damage, so that's going to help apply the Grievous to everybody. So pretty solid item if you have to buy anti-heal for the match. But not something I generally buy too often on Urgot. Next up for A tier, we have Edge of Night, and there's not too much to say about this item. I personally build it quite a bit I always build it into Vayne because it counters her Condemn, and that's also the only way she can proc the spell shield. So this item's pretty good into like matches where you're going to get a lot out of the spell shield, I would say. It also gives HP, lethality, damage, really good stats for Urgot. It's the only lethality item to also give HP, which is pretty nice, especially for Urgot. Moving on to B tier, our first item is going to be Death Dance, and I wish this item was better on Urgot, but sadly there's a pretty big range penalty on the damage you take as a bleed. So melee champs take 30%, and range champs only get 10%. So it's pretty gutted for Urgot because he is considered ranged. I would only build it into like heavy AD team comps because it does give a decent chunk of armor. It gives armor and damage, which is pretty nice. I'll sometimes build it if they have like a Zed on the team comp or just like a bunch of burst AD is when I would build it. Next up in B tier, we have Thornmail, and I personally don't really like this item too much anymore. I would only build it into heavy AD that's also a lot of like auto attackers, and you really need Grievous wounds. Like I said before with the Chainsword, I don't really like to build Grievous wounds because it's such a cost investment, and I feel like champions still heal. They either still heal a lot, or you just burst them so quick on Urgot anyway if you're going like a damage heavy build that you just don't really need the Grievous. But there is some games where it's good. If they're really heavy AD and they're going to be auto attacking you a lot, I do think Thornmail's a viable purchase. Next up for B tier, we have Wit's End, and this item does give a little bit of attack speed, which is why I'm putting it B tier, but the rest of this item's actually pretty good. You get movement speed, which helps with getting kited, obviously, and then you can also proc your shotguns quicker. And then the on-hit damage is also magic damage, so if people are stacking armor, this can be a good way to get a little bit of magic damage in. I would personally only go Wit's End, though, if they're really heavy AP, and you've already built some of these other MR items because they're usually better. But if you're in a game where you just need to stack a lot of MR, I think Wit's End is actually a pretty good damage option. Next up in B tier, we have Serpent's Fang, and this item's good into heavy shielding team comps. I would only build it if they have just a ton of shields. Sadly, this item does have a range penalty, and that's what really holds it back for Urgot. But the stats are decent. Lethality is a good stat on Urgot. If you're doing really good in the game and you're the main damage source, and again, they just have a ton of shields, I think it is a viable option. Speaking of lethality, next item is going to be Yamu's Ghostblade, and this gives you a ton of lethality as far as lethality items go. It also gives you a little bit of movement speed. I just find it as a pretty greedy item, I would say. Like, I would rather get an Edge of Night and have a little bit of HP at the cost of a little bit of lethality. But if you're into a lot of range champions and you really struggle with getting kited, and you're really fed and you want to get lethality, I do think this can be a pretty good option. Next up on the B tier list, we have an item that actually used to be S+ tier, and now it's B tier in my opinion, and that's going to be Hullbreaker. I would only build this item into, like, if you're planning on split pushing is when I would build this item. You really don't want to build it if you're going to be grouping a lot because you lose out on a lot of the passive. But the passive is also nerfed for range, so it's not really that great on Urgot nowadays. You don't really get too much resist out of it. Also, it scales now per level, so you want to be building it later on in the game. But overall, the stats are still decent. It still gives HP damage, HP regen, and it's still fairly cheap. So it can be an okay option if you just want to... If you're in a matchup where you just know you won't be grouping and you're just going to be splitting, I think it's still a decent option. So next up in B tier, we have Blade of the Ruin King, and along with some of the other items in this tier, it does give attack speed, which is kind of wasted on Urgot. Also pretty greedy because it doesn't really give you any defense. It does give you a little bit of lifesteal, but lifesteal is much worse than Omnivamp on Urgot, because lifesteal only works from the damage with your Ws. Omnivamp works from the damage from your shotgun passives, and that's doing most of the damage for Urgot. So yeah, I would put this B tier. It's an okay item maybe into like Cho'Gath and Scion and just champions that have a ton of HP stacking, but I wouldn't build it otherwise. Next up in B tier, we have Frozen Heart, and the reason I'm putting this B tier is because once you get level 9 on Urgot, you don't really have any mana issues, so the mana's kind of wasted. And then also, it doesn't give any HP compared to Randuin's, but there is still some team comps where I think it's decent. You mainly just want to build Frozen Heart if you're trying to slow their attack speed down. So if they have a lot of attack speed champions, and then also similar to Randuin's, you get the Warden's Mill passive, so you block damage on their auto attacks. So it can be really nice for that. I just think Randuin's is better in most situations. Next up in B tier, we have Gore Drinker, and this item, I used to build it quite a bit. It's not terrible on Urgot. It's really expensive, and ability haste isn't that insane on Urgot. It's okay, like sometimes you can get 2 E's off in a team fight, but ultimately your W has no cooldown, your ulti's already a short cooldown, and Q doesn't really matter that too much. So yeah, getting a double E can be nice, but I feel like it's not worth to build just for that. I would only build this item into really heavy melee team comps, like 4 or 5 melee champs, and I would personally only really buy it if you just really like the item, because I think there's other better mythic options for Urgot. Moving on, we also have Even Shroud, which is going to be B tier as well. I did a decent amount of testing with this item, and it's actually been buffed up since I've tested it, so it's probably a little bit better now. You can maybe even make an argument that it's A tier, but at the end of the day, I just feel like it's hard to build other mythics on Urgot when these other mythics are just a little bit better. If you want to go like really supporty though, I think this is a good like support item for your team. Whenever you CC somebody or whenever you get CC'd, you're going to amplify damage. So that can be pretty nice, and it's also pretty cheap. If you're really starved for gold, I think it can be an okay option if you just want to, again, support your team out a little bit. Moving on in B tier, we have Stridebreaker. There it is. This item's okay on Urgot. Again, it's a mythic item, so it's kind of hard to justify building it over the other mythic items, especially now that the lethality mythics give movement speed on the mythic passive. I was actually building Stridebreaker before they did that buff on the lethality mythics, and it felt pretty good. I don't know. It's not insane. It's not bad. I would say it's a solid B tier on Urgot. It can be decent if you really need movement speed, I guess. And the Heroic Gate passive is actually pretty nice. Like, maybe this has potential in some matchups. And maybe on, like, Urgot Jungle, it has a little bit of potential as well. Moving on in B tier, we have Trinity Force. And I'm going to put it on the same level as Stridebreaker. I think it's pretty similar. I think Stride, Gore, Triforce, they all feel in the same tier to me. I've done a decent amount of testing with Triforce. Again, there is some wasted attack speed. And also the item is really expensive. The Sheen does work in your W, but it's really hard to do it properly. Like, basically, you want your Sheen proc to be in your auto attack rather than your W, because it gets 50% reduced damage if it's in your W when you get the Sheen proc. So it's really hard to use at max potential. With that being said, though, you do take turrets really fast, and it does feel decent. So it's not too bad. If you guys want to do, like, a fun around build on Urgot, I would put it B tier. Very similar to Triforce, we have Divine Sundeer, and I'm also going to be putting this B tier. I don't really have too much to say about this item. I think it'd be better than Triforce if the enemy team is a lot tankier and you want the armor pen. But yeah, overall similar to Triforce, it's just hard to use the Sheen properly with Urgot. It does work, but it's hard to use it at like full potential. Next up in B tier, we have Deadman's Plate. And personally, I only buy this item once I sell my boots at the very end of the match. Like, once I'm full build, you can sell your boots for Deadman's, and it gives you a little bit of movement speed. You're still a little bit slower than if you keep your boots, but I think the trade-off is worth it because it's also a legendary item, so you get another mythic passive. I would only do this, by the way, if you're going lethality mythics, because they give you a lot of base movement speed from the mythic passive. So yeah, this can be a good option for selling boots, but otherwise I don't build it, so I'm putting it B tier. Next up for B tier, we have Turbo Chem Tank, and I personally don't build this mythic almost ever anymore. It could be okay in like Urgot Jungle maybe, or if you're I was gonna say into range team comps, but there's so many other options into range team comp. Like, you might as well just go Prowlers nowadays. I guess if you want to go tanky, it's not the worst option on Urgot. I think it's on par with some of these other mythic items, so I'm gonna put it B tier. So the last and final item for B tier is going to be Warmogs, and again, I don't really build this item too much nowadays. I would still put it B tier because you do get a big chunk of HP, and I think in some situations the HP regen could be nice. It's just so hit or miss though. Like, so many times the team fight just ends, and you're either going to be dead, or if you are alive, then the HP regen just doesn't really matter at that point. So the times where it's good is just kind of rare. But I would put it B tier. The stats aren't terrible. And it could be okay in like a Titanic, Frostfire, just like HP stack build with like a Sterax Stoneplate. It's not the worst item. Alright, so this is what the tier list is looking like so far. For the rest of the tiers, see and below, I'm just going to do rapid fire really quick. And we'll just kind of rate them really briefly. These are going to be items that you pretty much never build on Urgot, but I'm going to throw them here just in case people want my opinion on them. So the tier items, we'll put those in C tier. I think tier just takes way too long to stack on Urgot. Your W doesn't stack it up, so you have to stack it with Qs, which takes a really long time. Yeah, let's see. What else do we have here? What else is C tier? I would put Ravenous C tier. Again, Titanic Hydra is just always going to be better pretty much, but it's also not the worst item. Same with Shield Bow. I think Shield Bow is actually one of the better C tier items though. This item's kind of annoying. It gives attack speed and crit, which isn't very good for Urgot. Let's see. Knight's Vow. I'll put that C tier. Duskblade C tier. It still gives lethality, so it's not the worst. Same with Bloodthirster. Same with Gale Force. Let's see. What else do we have here? Axiom, I would put D tier. Your ulti's already a really short cooldown. It does give lethality, I guess, but it only gives you like 6 seconds refunded on your ultimate, which is like basically nothing. Because it goes off your base ulti cooldown, which is already really low on Urgot. Let's do Kraken, C tier. Runins is C tier. Runins is actually really fun. If you guys want like a normal, just fun around build with your friends, your W can do triple Runins proc, and then it can also proc your Titanic Hydra for 3 times. Silvermere Dawn. This is actually maybe B tier. I kind of forgot about it. If they have a lot of suppressions and you need MR, that's actually a decent item. I would put it B tier. So I think for the items, that's actually going to do it, guys. It looks like I covered pretty much everything. I guess Rage Blade, we'll put that... we'll put it D tier. I wouldn't buy that item on Urgot. Oh yeah, I guess Locket too. That's an okay item. I'll put it C tier. Same with Zeke's too. I've never really built Zeke's, but it's just a decent item. If you want to support your team, like if you're doing really bad, or maybe you're playing support Urgot, like these are decent items. I've actually built Knight's Vow before when my ADC was doing really good. Like we had a Jinx and I was doing pretty bad, and I just slapped a Edge of Night on her, or Knight's Vow, and it actually seemed kind of decent. I guess we'll put Abyssal in C tier as well. Not really that good on Urgot, but still gives a little bit of MR. Alright guys, that's going to do it for the video. Let me know what you guys think of my tier list, what you agree and disagree with. I just thought this would be a fun little thing to make, a little bit different. And I've been wanting to rate the items for a while now. So yeah, let me know what you think of videos like this. Maybe I could do one on like top lane champions as well. Or like maybe there's some other things that I could do tier lists on. I'm not really sure. But yeah, with that being said, guys, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And have a good day, everyone. Peace.
Freed by chains.